Kate, thank you for your time. I want to start right off with the money question. can anyone can anyone become rich, like
Mm.
or a millionaire? And should everyone become rich?
What a great question. I do believe that anyone has what it takes to be good with money. So I will say that we all can learn to be really good with money. Does it matter about becoming rich per se or a millionaire per se? I don't think so. I don't, for me, and kind of my philosophy, the amount of money does not matter because the economy, what things are worth, how much you can spend in different places of the world to get various things, it is all so variable, so relative. And quite frankly, the whole system is pretend. It's all just made up based on the subjective experience of human emotions. And that's what's underlying all markets. So, do we all need to become millionaires? I don't think so, like on the literal, like money in the bank. Do we all, like, I do believe that it's important for everyone who has the desire to learn how to experience a feeling of abundance, a
Okay.
feeling of plenty. Because ultimately, when we want to become a millionaire, when we want to make $1 million, or which, that's like a whole other conversation about what that even means. But um, what we are craving is a feeling. And the thing is, you don't actually need the money in order to have the feeling, but learning how to cultivate the feeling actually makes it easier to get the money.
Yeah. So you would say like the kind of your message isn't really about the money at all, actually. It's more about that feeling of abundance,
It's more
correct?
about the feeling of abundance because it is a lie that having a certain amount of money is going to actually change the way we feel. What I found with thousands of customers and clients is that if we do not have the neural patterning in
Mhm.
our nervous systems to feel the way we want to feel with money, no amount of money will ever make us feel free, secure, abundant, safe if we don't know how to feel those things with not without the money, but separate from external circumstances needing to line up a certain way.
Yeah, so I want to get in because I saw your intro video where you were talking about like people who are making $270,000, they still feel like they don't have enough or something like that. And
Yeah.
I remember watching. There's a YouTube video that I watched where this guy went into this Amish community, and like everybody there was so happy, and they like literally really don't care about money. They like any extra money they make, they just give it away to the church or something like that. And so, why do you think we are like that? Why do you think people are? Some people like can be making like so much money and they still have that scarcity mindset, or like that they don't, it's not plenty for them, whereas in some people can be like don't have much. Like whenever I'm traveling, I'm like I see the happiest people who don't necessarily have money. Like
Yeah.
what is that happening?
Yeah. So, first of all, certainly in the United States, because of the media and our culture, we're just conditioned to believe that more is better inherently.
Mm.
And it's not. Now, I also want to be super clear. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a lot of money. It's wonderful. It gives you wonderful choices. It allows you to have power in the world that you don't have otherwise in order to make change. So I'm not saying it's not an either or. That being said, we have put money in the wrong place in our lives. We've given it a role that it is not designed for. Money does not create any kind of sense of well being alone. But what we associate money with and how we can find that sense of, okay, do I have enough? Like, am I connected to something greater than myself? Do I have love in my life? Do I have health? Do I have purpose? Like, those are the things, like you said, that when we travel outside our own
Mm.
communities, which I really recommend you do if you
Mm.
have the possibility to do that, we can begin to unravel our false ideology and say, like, oh, actually, yes, money is wonderful and can do certain things, but I need to be really clear about what it can and cannot do, because what ends up happening, and this is what makes me really sad, and this is part of my mission, what we see is that people sacrifice their health, their relationships, their mental well-being, their emotional well-being for money, only to realize when it's way too late that they could have had all of the things that they thought money was going to give them without those sacrifices. And if we get clear on the role of money in our lives, then we can go about actually creating full, whole abundance, which is partially financial, but also comes multifactorially from a lot of different sources in our
Mm.
lives, most of which are free.
Mm. Do you think so? Have you gone through this kind of phase as well? Like, do you personally have experienced that? Because I definitely went through that as well.
It's like a daily practice for me. It's a daily
Okay.
practice, and I'll just be really transparent with you. Like, sometimes when I think about, if I'm, let's per se I'm at a workshop, or like I'm doing
Mm.
a manifesting meditation or something, and it's
Mm.
like, what do you really want? A lot of
Mm.
the times the initial thing that comes up for me in terms of what I desire is actually associated with money, whether it's like this house in this particular neighborhood, or this possibility
Mm.
to travel and do this XYZ thing with my kids and my husband or whatever. Like, oftentimes it's associated with money. But here's my practice when this comes up for me, because this is helping me to repattern my own psyche. And this is what I share as well, is like, okay, sweetie, like my little ego self, like, that's an illusion. Like, you think that you are only going to be able to access a particular state of being that you desire when you live in that kind of house, or
Mm.
when you can take that kind of trip or whatever. That's so cute that you think that
Mm.
that's separate from you. But
Mm.
actually, you can have that now. So
Mm.
how can we begin to, probably similar to Amish communities, I don't know them personally, but
Mm.
like, begin to actually harvest the well-being that is already present? And then, so that's what I practice. It's like, okay, if I'm craving this feeling of like feeling like a queen in my home, feeling like, feeling like I'm just like oozing abundance, how can I do that right now with my morning coffee on my balcony that I have right
Mm.
now, with like this gorgeous bougainvillea plant that I have
Yeah.
right now, that is like the epitome of life force and bounty, and like, her growth is free.
Yeah.
It's it's
It's kind
amazing.
of it's kind of like I heard you say something like I'll be happy once I get this, or when I.
Totally.
But the truth is, you can have that. Like you can.
We can all have that
Yeah.
now. We can all have that now. But here's the funny catch. What I've experienced and what my students have experienced, our community, is that the more we actually give ourselves permission to receive what's already here, to enjoy what's already here. And I don't mean like your basic gratitude list, or like that can be very watered down and like meh. I
Hmm.
mean a full bodied ecstatic experience of like letting yourself feel the sensation of everything you already have right now. The love, the snuggles. Something I do every night is like, I go in
Mm.
after my kids have fallen asleep, and I just like put my face
Yeah.
on their faces, and it's so yummy and delicious, and they're like so precious and there's so much love, and allow myself to feel that. And then the more filled up we can become with things as they are, the more we approve of exactly what is already, the more we fully digested and received what we have, we actually become magnetic for the next thing
Yeah,
that's going to bring in joy and abundance, the next opportunity, the next, sale, the next whatever.
that's true. Like as you were saying that, it almost reminds me of like how, I don't know if you heard this. I don't know who said it. Probably like Confucius or something. But like, like a healthy man wants like a million things. A sick man only wants one thing. And it's kind of like when I go through like this like really hard, like some sort of a disaster or something like that, and then you look at what you survive that, for example, and you're like, oh my gosh, like like that's all we really want. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, a couple years ago, my husband was hit by a car, and he was okay, but he couldn't walk for a long time, and he's still recovering from that accident. And I just remember he went to a Joe Dispenza event, and he for those who aren't familiar, Joe Dispenza leads these events where you go like deep into meditation, and it's really about creating from the quantum, and like healing your body in many ways from your intention and your focus. And the data he has in his research projects are incredible. And Mike sent me a video of himself running on the beach. And after seeing him struggle and like not be able to walk for so long, it was that perfect example of like, we we don't need anything else. We don't
Mhm.
need anything else. Like, what we already have is so beautiful. And it's all relative, like I said, right? Like, it's
Mhm.
all relative at the beginning. Do we all need to be millionaires? No. Do we all
Mhm.
need to learn how to tap into abundance inside of ourselves? Yes.
But do you think that also still happens in uh because like how much of it is like has to do with status? Because I do hear a lot of people say, like, I don't care about money, but they love this type of house, or I don't, I just want to go on this vacation, and
Yeah.
they think that that's not related to money, but it is related to status,
It's
right? The
all
reason,
related to money.
yeah,
Like, we can't do stuff that we want to do without money. So that's
yeah.
the flip side of it, is like, how much is it related to status? Now, do you mean by that question how much of our ability to even think beyond the
No,
financial is
the
related to status? Or do you mean like, tell me more?
like for example, that desire for that, let's say this country home, right? We think that
Oh,
it's coming from the fact that I love this design or this house, but because I was watching this Korean TV drama, it's called Crash Landing on You, and it's like this South Korean woman, like a heiress, dropping into North Korea, and even in North Korea, like you can
yeah.
kind of see where everyone's poor. There's still this status thing happening where people want this foreign product because of this, or
Yeah.
they look at this somebody who has like a 2 bedroom house instead of a studio, and they're like, wow, like, do you know what I mean? So I don't
Yeah.
like, how much of do you think what we think we desire is actually what we desire, like a beautiful house, versus
Right.
what we really want is status?
I love this
Does that?
question so
Yeah.
much. Fundamentally, we are animals. Okay. So we have to really go back to like, what is driving our basic behavior?
Mm,
Our behavior is driven by survival. We are animals, we're herd creatures. In herds, there's a pecking order. There's the alpha, there's the beta, there's like, uh-oh, if I do something to piss everyone else off, I'm going to be cast out, and then I'm going to die because I'm either going to starve or I'm going to be eaten by a predator. So we have to really get like, we think we're like writing emails
mm,
and coming up with great messaging and being compassionate. We're animals.
yeah.
And our behavior is driven by survival and perpetuation of the species. So our desires are going to be intermingled with our survival wiring. But we can do something about that so that we can kind of like bring consciousness into it so that it's not all
Mhm.
unconscious. But so when you're asking, is it about status? I actually do think a lot of it's about status because in our deep evolutionary wiring, our survival depended on our status. And
Mhm.
so it's like, I don't think about that in terms of like, oh, it's materialistic or it's shallow. I think about it as that's how animals are, and we are animals. And the more we can learn about our true nature as animals, the more we can learn about our physiology and how it impacts our thoughts and behaviors, the more we can actually then bring in consciousness and use the way we're wired to create beautiful lives, as opposed to just being totally unconscious and going after things. Because the truth is, like, you and I both know plenty of people who have tons of money and tons of status and are not happy,
Yeah.
right? Like, happiness, satisfaction, joy does not come from money and status.
Yeah.
It comes from somewhere else. But we have to be clear about what game we're playing. And I think that, like, looking at that stuff, if I think about, I moved to Miami from Maine. In Maine, it's a very different culture around money. Even if you have money in Maine, you like pretend you don't. Everybody just drives a
Yeah.
beat up Volvo, like, and has holes in their socks. It's like a thing. Versus in Miami, no matter how much money you have, you try to look as though you have as much money as possible. So very weird, super trippy,
Yeah.
culturally speaking. I'm just like, oh wow, so different here. And I'm noticing, like, after years and years and years of driving a Toyota, all of a sudden I'm like, maybe I want to test drive a Porsche. And I'm
Mhm.
like, that's so interesting. What's that about for me?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I'm doing that deeper dive around, like, what do I think driving a fancy car is going to get me that I don't have now? Now, at the end of that inquiry, I give myself full permission to get a Porsche, but
Mhm.
I don't want to do it from an unconscious pattern
Mhm.
of thinking that it's going to get me something that ultimately it is impossible for me to receive from a car. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you do that? Through like meditation? Like when you're doing that inquiry, like
Yeah.
what does
I mean,
that
like,
process
it's
look
like
like?
I'm like walking down the street and I'm
Mhm.
like walking from my condo to my office and I'm
Yeah.
like looking at the cars and I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about, like, oh, that's a nice car. That
Okay.
one's not so nice. And then I actually feel into, or even this morning, I was driving to the doctor and I was in my Toyota and I was like, okay, how's this experience feel? And then I
Mhm.
imagined myself driving a fancier car and
Mhm.
I was like, huh, I wonder what that
Mm.
would feel like. Would it feel better? Does that feel important to me? Could I embody that sensation right now as I drive the car that I currently have? And the truth is, like, it was kind of a fun drive.
Mm.
And it made me happy. And
Yeah.
so I think it's like a game I play with myself
Okay.
of how good can I feel right now with things the way they are.
Yeah. Maybe like for me, if I were to kind of imagine that, I would probably imagine something like if nobody ever knew that I was driving this car, or not a single soul in the
Yes.
in the world ever even knew that, right? I know,
Then would
like
it matter?
would I care? Yeah,
I
or something
love
like that.
that so much because, like, okay, so I'll going back to my morning coffee and my bougainvillea. I have this bougainvillea plant on my balcony and I am obsessed with it. She
Hmm.
is like so bountiful and so beautiful, and the colors of the petals, it's insane. And like, I've had a love affair with this plant for, ever since we got her. And I go out there and I commune with her in the morning. And that is, I know it makes me sound like a little cuckoo,
Hmm.
but the relationship with this plant and the way I get filled up from a sensory perspective is one of the deepest sources of abundance in my life. Like, there's something about I'm learning from this plant about what it means to
mm,
be in relaxed abundance, because she
mm,
just is bounty. She
mm,
just
mm,
is beauty, you know? And she just takes the resources that are available to her, which are free,
mm, mm,
the
mm,
sun, the rain,
mm,
and
mm.
she just grows.
Yeah.
And she's unapologetic about it and all this stuff. And I'm like, I mean, I guess I do talk about it on podcasts, right? But I'm like, that experience is deeply personal. Like, it's I don't need anybody
Yeah, yeah,
else
yeah,
to
I
know about
understand.
me and
Yeah.
my bougainvillea. And and so I love what you're saying about like the car or things people can
Yeah.
see versus what, so it's like, how does it look versus how does it feel?
Yeah.
And I think similarly, I'm always coming back to not what it's going to look like, but what it's going to feel like, because ultimately we are not outside ourselves. We
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
only ever be inside ourselves.
Yeah.
And so if we're building our life based on what it looks like, we will come up empty.
Yeah.
But if we're building our life based on what it feels like, we'll probably feel pretty good.
Yeah. I love that. And it kind of also reminded me of what you said about like back in Maine. Because I think sometimes the other way also comes from trauma, where for me, I actually worry about how other people are going to judge me if I drive too nice of a car, for example, right?
Totally.
So I would actually force myself not to do that, not to splurge or like not to. Do you understand what I mean? So
I totally do. And I'm glad you brought up trauma, because I have a similar experience, and I think other people do. We have all sorts of imprints in
mhm,
our nervous systems and our psyche based on past experience with money.
mm, mm, mm,
And for me, I was like called out or made fun of or just like pestered for having a relatively well-known mother
mm,
growing
mm,
up.
mm,
And
mm,
like people would make, bring up stuff about money and da, 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 and so many assumptions. And so it didn't feel safe to stand out. And so I've had to do like work on
mm,
myself and on my repatterning my neural pathways so that I feel safe standing out, because the career, like my calling, I didn't really choose this career on purpose. I keep doing it on purpose, but
mm,
like it wasn't like I set out to be like, I'm going to be somebody on the internet. Like,
mm,
A, that
mm.
was not a career possibility when we were growing up, but B, like that wasn't, but it's taken work to expand. So it's, I have a similar thing where it's like I actually don't drive as nice of a car, not because I don't, A, not because I can't afford it, uh, but mostly because I'm afraid it's not going to make me
Yeah,
relatable.
yeah. And that's what I wanted to say. Like I think status works the other way too. Like
It
where
does.
if you wear like a $2,000 suit to like let's say a group of kids who are skaters, like your actually status goes down. So it's you
Right.
know what I mean.
It's,
So
and that's back to our animal instinct
yeah,
of like safety in community.
yeah,
And I think that that also comes back to the differentiation between belonging and fitting in.
yeah,
And, Brene Brown talks about that a lot,
yeah.
that sense of like, okay, because status is really more about fitting in. Whereas a deep sense of
Mm,
belonging is like, we can be wildly different and we can actually disagree. And you
mm,
can show up in ripped jeans because you feel great in those. And I can show up in my $2,000 suit because I feel great at those, in that. And yet there's love and there's communion and
mm.
there's connection there.
Yeah, like you're saying, like fitting in is like maybe conditional. Like I have
Conditional.
to do this in order to fit in versus
I have to
belonging is
change who I
yeah,
am
yeah,
in order to be part of this group, versus
yeah,
belonging is I'm
yeah,
accepted for all of who I am.
yeah. I actually wanted to ask you about. So your mother is Christian, Dr. Christian Northrup. She's
Mhm.
actually I knew about her before I learned about you. So because a lot of like my clients are kind of big personal brands like Evie Bernstein and like
Yeah.
they're like always talking about her. So she's kind of a pioneer in this like women's health content, and she's like this big name, right?
Yeah.
How has that impacted you? you
Oh my
think, like
goodness. It's
growing
a
up?
big question.
And
I love this question actually. So, I think there's a couple of things. One of the things that I really have dug into research wise over the last several years is about how our nervous system mitigates our unconscious patterns and therefore creates our reality.
Mhm,
And I think a lot of our understanding of the law of attraction is actually like deeply embedded in what's going on in our nervous system. I don't
mhm,
think it's so much like metaphysics as people think.
mhm.
But so one thing that like
I agree with you,
impacted,
by the way.
cool. And we can totally get into the
Uh,
science there. I'd love
uh,
to if you want to. But um, one of the things that was beautiful about being raised by a powerful public woman is there's some ways that it doesn't feel like a stretch for me. It's just like, yeah, this is just what people do, right?
mm,
Because I have an imprint of possibility and expansion as it relates to like being a public speaker, being valued for my ideas, stuff like that. That's number one. So positive. On the other hand, some of the stuff I've needed to consciously rewire is that like my mom had some fallout from being such a pioneer and such a public person sharing unpopular ideas in increasing ways over time.
mm,
And what I also imprinted was, and part of that has to do with my parents' divorce. So the more quote unquote famous and successful my mom got, the less my parents' marriage worked. And that's kind of like their own story to tell. But as a kid, what I imprinted was being big and successful means you end up alone. And
mm,
so that part has been, there were so many moments that I can point to of either unconsciously sabotaging myself in my career or unconsciously sabotaging myself in love because I had an unconscious idea that I couldn't have both at the same time. And
mm,
so, like, we get these imprints, and some of them lead to possibility, and some of them lead to limitation. And I think it's our job to uncover the ones that are leading to limitation and also to be really grateful for the ones that are just like
mm,
our free space. Like,
mm,
it's we all have easy buttons that we
mm,
inherited. And so I'm so grateful for like it doesn't
mm,
freak me out really to do,
mm,
I talk to people who are like, "Oh, how do you just get out there and say your thing?" I'm like, "I don't know, I just do." Versus other areas, I've had to really be like, "Okay,
mm,
I can see the way that I think I'm going to die if I make more than a certain amount of money, or
mm,
if I like or and when I say that, I'm talking again about our animal nature and the real sense that our survival limbic brain has, that there is an actual threat of death
mm.
if we do things that are outside the realm of what we grew up with as normal,
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
so
Go ahead.
yeah. Like hearing that, like it's so crazy to me how like literally trauma can come from anywhere. Like you can be raised in the
Yeah.
most perfect home, and you will still have some trauma that comes from like
Yeah.
um. But I love what you said about how like you embrace both, right? Like it's because like a lot of times like I think a lot what people tend to do is they just focus on the negative trauma. Like I kind of went through
Yeah.
that phase. It's like I blame my parents for everything.
Yeah.
And then at some point at a certain age I was like, oh my god, I'm so glad my parents did this. And like it's I feel like we just keep looking at so like my next question actually related to that is um because I don't know if I sense this a little bit. I don't know if you also sense if you agree with this, but I see now that like everyone's talking about trauma online and social media, and there's like all these pop psychologists and things like that. I have this feeling like the culture is shifting where people are kind of using trauma almost as an excuse, like oh, because do you know what I mean? Like
I
trauma,
do.
everything is trauma response, and
Yeah. I mean, I think that like there's a really interesting book called The Coddling of the American Mind. I don't know if you've read it, but
Jonathan Haidt. Yeah.
Jonathan Haidt, yeah,
Yeah.
his new one is called The Anxious Generation, also great.
Yeah.
Um, and he talked about like the way things shifted in liberal universities, and how there was a certain period of time, and I don't exactly remember the time period, maybe around 2015, 2012, somewhere around there, that it became that we couldn't hold difference anymore in more of an elite intellectual environment. And that all of a sudden, people started saying that, like, when someone disagreed with them or if they didn't hold the same viewpoint, that was harm. And it's
Mm.
like, no, 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 that's not harm.
Yeah.
That's just having two different
Yeah.
perspectives, which is actually healthy and generative and makes us all stronger. And so we throw around this like, oh, that caused me harm, or like that was traumatic. And listen, I think it can go both ways, right? Because then sometimes, as you said, if you grow up in like this beautiful environment, and
Mhm.
there can be this assumption that you don't get to have any hangups or
Mm.
any complaints or any, right? And then we kind of play the trauma Olympics of like,
Mhm.
well, these people all had it worse. And then
Yeah.
therefore, what do I have to complain
Yeah.
about? And so the whole thing, like, I think we just have to come back to, how does it feel for me? And the truth
Mhm.
is, every single one of us has nervous system imprints that are holding us back. And
Mhm.
every single one of us has nervous system imprints that are really supporting our dreams and
Mhm.
goals. And each of us are responsible for learning the mechanics of our own bodies and our own psyche and our own brain. The good news is they all work the same. And really understanding that, like, we all are incredibly neuroplastic, meaning everything is up for grabs. We
Mhm.
can all change our patterning. And so rather than railing about our trauma, and like, listen, I do think there's something very therapeutic about telling our stories. In fact, there's incredible data about how important it is to tell our stories. But then we have to say, am I telling my story because this is the only way I know how to get attention? Or am I telling my story
Mhm.
because my actual goal is to create a new one?
Mhm.
And unfortunately, because of our limbic brain, our survival wiring, what gets the most attention, right, in the news, they say if it bleeds, it leads, meaning the most terrifying, sensational stories get the most attention. Conflict gets the most attention. Controversy gets the most attention because we are all wired to be scanning and sorting for a threat. So, from a brand perspective, that's why controversy works. That's why talking about trauma all the time works. That's why airing your stuff online, it works for traffic. But we just have to ask ourselves, like, what is the goal here in the end? Like, am
Mhm.
I here for healing? Am I here for evolution? Or am I here for clicks? And if I'm here for clicks, by all means, trauma it up. And if I'm here for healing, like, then maybe how can we further the
Yeah.
conversation and actually pass along the
Yeah.
good news that we can all rewire ourselves
Yeah.
really anytime.
Yeah. I love how you explained that, because a lot of times I teach storytelling, and a lot of times I talk about the difference between telling a vulnerable story versus telling a sob story, and a lot of
Mm,
people can't tell the difference. Like, when you're still in that trauma, I feel like you're trying to tell a vulnerable story, but it comes out as a sob story, or like you're airing your dirty laundry or something
yeah.
like that, where your focus is, you're more focused on the villain than yourself as the hero or something like that, right? So
Yes.
you make yourself the victim rather than the hero. Versus, like, a vulnerable story is when you start to admit, okay, this is where I could have, this is how I can fix this. This is like, you start taking more responsibility. And you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Like, clickbaits work. And
It's totally
and I talk about this all the time. Like even in my business, like people nowadays like always talking about authenticity, and you just got to be authentic. But if you are really being authentic and you're really truly being honest, you are gonna lose out on some opportunities, and you are gonna lose to the people who are doing the clickbait stuff. Like uh, if you're genuinely trying to put out a good message. But I think in the short term, I think clickbait works. But I think in the long run, clickbait actually can backfire, in
I
my opinion.
totally
Yeah.
agree because, like, ultimately, in human evolution, I think what we're looking for, what we're all evolving towards, is a deeper rooted sense of safety, not only in ourselves, but also in community. And when someone is using clickbait or sensationalism only, every now and again, like, I'm really here for a hot headline, but sometimes I'll come up with a great subject line and I'm like, ooh, I'm using that, even though it's like a little bit like people are going to open the email and be like, oh, that maybe a little bit of that peppered in, fun. But if there's not a foundation in your business or in your community building or your storytelling where ultimately you're leading people into a safer community, into a place where they can trust you,
Mm.
then that doesn't have longevity. I mean, I've been around in this online space since 2009. Like,
Yeah.
I've been around, you see a lot of people coming and going. In online years, I'm totally geriatric. And and I'm grateful for that. I did an interview the other day with a woman who she was like, I've been on your email list for 10 years. And I was like so deeply touched by that.
Mhm.
And I think that when we can build in evolution so that we're actually like taking people towards a truer version of themselves and that they can trust you, because what's so cool is that I learned this from Josh Pice. It's so great. He teaches a course called Committed Impulse, and he talks about that if you go see a play, like a live play, people on stage, and a dog or a little kid come out on stage, you cannot take your eyes off of them, even if the main character is doing like the biggest monologue of the show. If there's a dog on stage or like a 4-year-old, all eyes are on
Yeah.
that. Why is that? Because animals and kids don't have all the layers of conditioning of performing. They're just always telling the truth. And the truth is incredibly magnetic.
Mhm.
We can't take our eyes off of it. So if you're not twisting yourself into a total pretzel for your audience, trying to be like all the things you think they want you to be, but actually just telling the truth, it's kind
Yeah,
of
I
work.
love that. Yeah.
I would imagine. I mean, that's kind of what
Yeah.
you teach, but
Yeah.
like it does
No,
work.
you're absolutely right. Like I can sense it. Like I didn't know that, by the way, with the dog and the child, but
It's cool, right?
it totally makes sense because sometimes, like, I'll be honest, like sometimes I'm trying to be authentic, but people can always tell when you're actually just being authentic versus when you're trying to be authentic, and they can sense it.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It's usually the content that does the best, or like when I do this what I call Sunday service every week with my community. When I do a session where I wasn't even thinking about it, are usually the ones people are like, oh my gosh, today's Sunday service was awesome, and it's like the ones I always least expect
Isn't that
because I
amazing?
yeah.
And I mean, I don't know what your, spiritual beliefs are or whatever, but when I have that in terms of like being a creative, being a storyteller, being a writer, I think about it as like I have let myself, with the lowercase s,
Mhm.
step aside, and I have opened up to just receive like what wanted to come through. And I, at that point, then just become a conduit for some kind of energy or message that needed to come through. And it's no longer mine, because
Yeah.
I'll even like, I remember this one time my husband was reading me from across the living room. He reads me this paragraph from a book he's reading. And he was reading on his Kindle, so I didn't know what book it was. And I was like, wow, that was so good. What was that from? And he was like, that book is called Do Less by Kate Northrup. I was like,
It's like, I said
recollection of
that.
writing that. It was so cool because it was such a great example, I think, of that feeling of like, if we can put ourselves aside, our status seeking, our, like our whatever we get into, all of our own little stuff,
Mhm.
then we can really open up to a
Yeah, yeah,
level
yeah.
of creativity and also service that
Mhm.
I think wants to come through us. And the more we actually do the nervous system healing, the more we move through the traumas, the more open channels we become, because the more relaxed we are, the more of that can come
Yeah.
through. I think of it like, I mean, honestly, it's kind of like an intense metaphor, but like I think of it like a sphincter. Like we have these different sphincters in our bodies,
Mhm.
like the cervix is a sphincter and all these things. And like the more relaxed we are, the more these muscles actually just
Mhm.
like open and will like let a baby go through, or, let us go to the
That's
bathroom,
such a
or whatever it is.
that's such a great metaphor for everything in life. Like,
The sphincter
and
metaphor.
I can, yeah. I mean, just because like it's also like that. Like when you're chasing after someone, like you're actually
Mhm.
gonna chase them away, right? Versus
Yes.
it's when you're relaxed, you end up attracting that person or something
You
like
do,
that.
because also like
Yeah.
human communication, is it not so much more attractive when someone's kind of leaning back and
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
energy of like, I'm in trust, you're not the only
Yeah.
gig in town, like I whatever, and then you're just like, I want to do business with you.
Yeah.
Great. Versus someone who's like,
Yeah.
I need the sale or whatever.
Yeah. It's so counterintuitive because I feel like nowadays with because I also teach personal branding, I think we're so I don't know where I heard this quote, but I heard this quote like humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And
I love that.
it's I feel like we're nowadays when if we're growing a personal brand, we're trying to build social media or something like that, we're almost like forcing ourselves to think about ourselves all the time and like, oh, how do I brand myself? What is my message? What is my and I think the more we do that, actually the less, because if I look at my clients, right, and I have clients that are like just starting out, like people that are struggling, all the way up to people that are like people like Mel Robbins, right? And if I look at all of them, like the more successful they are, what I realize is that they actually don't focus on like, oh, what's my message gonna be, or what's my tagline, or what's like they don't think about that at all. They're like you said, they're kind of channeling,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and then
Channeling
it's
and
like,
like being part of the divine symphony that brings the message to the people who need it. And it's not really about them
yeah,
anymore, like the person bringing it.
yeah, exactly, and that's when people are actually more drawn to that person, or
Yeah.
um, so
It's
yeah,
also
it's so
just easier,
counterintuitive.
quite
Yeah,
frankly. I
yeah,
don't know,
that's
for
true.
me,
It's
from a
like the
writing
whole
and
do less.
messaging perspective, if I just like think about myself less, it's just there's less static on the line. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's just like easier.
Yeah. And I also think that we start overthinking if we're like, oh, is that really my message? Should that be my niche? Is that really the right color for my brand? Like once we start
Yeah.
thinking like that, I feel like it's like we're
Wow.
we're trying too hard.
We're trying too hard.
Uh,
Yes, totally.
um, I saw this video where you were talking about the four different types of trauma,
Hmm.
and one of them, this reminded me because you were talking about the clickbait thing. One of them is I don't know what you called it, like it's like the social or community
Collective.
collective trauma. Yeah, 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 exactly.
Mm.
So, do you think that's the reason why we're why those clickbaits work actually? Because
Mm.
we're hitting on people's nervous system.
Yes, yes. And I think it's irresponsible, quite frankly. Like there's a lot. Okay, so there's so much in here. So when there's a tragic world event, for example, and this is, listen, it is just intensified and intensified since like 2015, 2016. There's this, and I know you work in the personal branding space. I'm sure this comes up. There's this, and luckily I see this shifting now, but there's this idea that like everyone needs to be posting about it and sharing their take. And if you're not talking about it, it means you're a heartless, whatever, right? self-absorbed a-hole.
Like
And
silence is violence.
silence is, oh, don't even, and it's like, okay, first of all, I am not the news.
Mhm.
Okay, number one. Number two, from what I know of trauma and the impact on our nervous systems, if I am continuing to share the same traumatic event, I actually am. I know I said the whole thing about harm, but like
Mhm.
literally to me, unless it is a deeply personal issue and I must say something, or unless
Mhm.
I know I'm using my platform to be part of the
Mhm.
solution, otherwise, I am just re traumatizing people.
Mhm.
Specifically, the people who are the most deeply impacted by that event. Perhaps it's an event that happened to a certain kind of women, right? For example, like
Mhm.
if let's pretend something traumatic and dramatic happens on the news to, blonde 5'4" women who have,
Mhm.
a bob, right? Like I'm it's just like I'm using a silly example just to
Mhm.
paint the picture. And then that keeps getting reposted and reposted. My nervous system, because I identify with that kind of woman because I look like that,
Mhm.
my nervous system, even though that event did not happen to me, it will be deeply impacting, and my body will respond as though it happened directly to me the more I identify with the person or the people it happened to. So, as someone who does have a platform, I feel it's my responsibility to take care of my community, which means not reposting horror after horror
Mhm.
after horror, because
Mhm.
I'm here to help us heal, not
Mhm.
to further the collective traumas.
Yeah.
And I do think that, like, when it gets to marketing tactics, branding, social media, storytelling, all of it, like all media, I think there's a way to gather people's attention that's actually helpful and healing. You can still get people's attention through psychological triggers that are not activating their trauma.
Yeah.
That's
That's like
nuance.
a. It's
It's
almost like
nuance,
a.
but look, I think it can be done.
Yeah. It's almost like a. That's like a cheat code, but it's a cheat code that we should have the responsibility not to use.
I think that marketers, I mean, someday it would be great if like marketers were trauma informed.
Yeah,
you know
I
I
agree.
think it's a really important value of our company. We don't always get it right, you know always learning, always growing in that area, but yeah, just to really get that, like, there's our personal trauma, there's our collective trauma, and then there's our ancestral trauma. And when we know that, as storytellers, as platform stewards, whatever, um, we can really like take care of people
Yeah.
essentially.
No, I love that you said that because you're right. I do feel like there's a shift first of all, and because sometimes I think we have to overcorrect a little bit
Yeah,
the wrong way in order for us to come back. And
100%.
yeah, and I feel like at some point I think it will hopefully, like, with you talking about this stuff like this, hopefully it will become common knowledge that okay, we shouldn't use these kind of tactics. Because like for me as a copywriter and marketer, it's like, oh, I know I can just do this and get more sales,
I
but
know.
is that ethically like I have to consciously think about that all the time, and it's
Yeah.
yeah, and it's
And I
not
think
easy,
it's
right?
important to
Yeah,
be asking those questions. Now,
yeah,
that being said, does that mean any kind of using strategies of persuasion and influence is bad? No,
yeah, no.
because hopefully you are leading people towards a solution that you deeply believe in, that you have the receipts to prove that you get results, that's going to help make their lives better.
Yeah,
So in that case, like, why wouldn't you do what you can do to move people towards a
yeah,
solution to their problem?
yeah.
Right? Like, so it's a dance.
Yeah, I know this is kind of vague, but I the way I would phrase it is like it's a difference between using fear to sell versus hope.
Yeah.
And like in Hunger Games, they say the only thing that's more powerful than fear is hope.
Mm.
And I think we need to go to that place where we're selling from a place of like
Yes.
inspiring people rather than
I think
scaring
about
people into buying.
yes, because like when I was coming up in this industry, it was far more focused on poke the pain, like
Mhm,
agitate the pain.
mhm,
And I'm like, people are already agitated in their pain
mhm.
all day long,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
one of our jobs, I think, is to hold the thermostat of possibility. In my programs, I say to people, listen, there's a there's going to be some people in this program who have never had someone stand for them in unshakable knowing that they have what it takes to be good with money. There are going to be
Mhm,
people in this program who have never had that. And I am that person. There is not one person in this program that I do not unshakably know in my body has what it takes to thrive in this area of their lives. And until you have that knowing in your body, I will be holding that thermostat for you. And in
mhm,
this container, I will be the thermostat. And the cool thing about the nervous system is it doesn't believe the lie of separation. So if you're in space with someone holding the thermostat of possibility for you, your body, through mirror neurons, your body actually energetically upgrades its own nervous system imprint of what's available to you through them. So I think our job is also to hold that thermostat of hope and possibility and deep knowing when people are building that in themselves to just help them build that.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's such a huge part of the type of work we do. That proximity, like you know how they say you're like the average of 5 people around you,
It's true.
like that. I think that's so important. Another thing you talk about is I think it was called ancestral trauma. Is that the same as generational trauma, or is it
Yes.
different? Oh, it is the same thing. Okay.
Same thing
Do
as
you want
generational
to?
trauma. So, like, epigenetics tells us that basically the scary stuff that happened to our ancestors from an evolutionary perspective, it gets some of it gets handed down to us through our DNA. And so we can have trauma responses to stimuli that we have never had a lived experience of stress from that stimuli, and yet our body has a memory of it. The good news is the nervous system healing practices that we do in modern day, like in real time, can also heal the ancestral trauma. So it literally, like when people say, when you heal, you're healing 7 generations back and 7 generations forward, that's actually scientifically true.
Mm. Yeah, when I heard that, I was like, I was kind of blown away. Like the whole thing about how you said the eggs, like all the eggs that a woman carries is like from 4 months in the
Yeah.
womb. Like I was like, wow.
Yes. So all my eggs were formed in my body at 4 months gestation, which means the egg I came from grew in my grandmother's womb because my mother had all her eggs at 4 months gestation. So the original
Mm-mm.
egg that made me grew in my granny's womb, which is just
Yeah,
wild.
yeah. So, so it sounds like there's like a little bit when we talk about generational trauma. It sounds like there's some nature also because like some of those generational trauma comes from how we're raised, right? Like,
Right, right, exactly. Some of it's just behavior and beliefs that we handed down because it was modeled to us or told to us. And then some of it's just in our DNA that no
it's
one ever
literally in
told us, but it's just in there.
yeah. So it's like both. It's a little bit of both, and I
It's a little bit
hundred
of both.
percent I believe that because like there's this word called Han in Korean culture. They say like this is a trait that every Koreans have. Did I freeze?
You froze, but I mean, I can hear you. I just
Okay,
can't see
I'm
you.
sure it'll come back.
Okay.
uh, but this is a concept of how like it's a word that doesn't exist in any other language, but it has to do with like grit, resilience,
Mm.
and this is a characteristics that all Koreans have, and it just makes sense that like it's probably from that generational trauma that
Yeah.
we have.
Yeah. Well, and you think about like cultural groups, like I know we're not supposed to say that certain things are true about cultural groups, but sometimes the evidence just shows us that actually statistically speaking, these traits can be true, not for every single person, of course, because we never want to generalize, but like there are these trends and traits. And I think that that's like a beautiful example of that. The other thing, and so this is a perfect example, that like there's generational trauma, but there's also generational joy. There's generational
Mm,
blessings, and so when we think about like grit and resiliency and this concept of Han, like that could be certainly a trauma response,
hmm.
and also it can be a real blessing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so we can think about, what have I inherited that's maybe like not so awesome, but what have I inherited that's a total blessing, and how can I use those gifts?
yeah. I'm gonna restart my video just so
Okay,
that. Can
there
you
you
see me?
are. Yep,
Okay, awesome. Sorry about that.
that's okay.
Let me see. I have. There's more things I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
I want to talk to you a little bit about your your branding and how you grew your business. I know that like that's not like the main topic, but I feel like
Love
it
it.
would be helpful.
Great.
Um, so can I ask you, do you write your own copy
I do.
like on your website? Okay.
Yeah. I would say, I'm going to say 80% of it I wrote.
Got
Not
it.
Probably not every single word, but yeah, 80% I write my own stuff.
And so let's start from the beginning. Like, how did you get into this? Um, and yeah, what is the thing that keeps you like going?
Yeah. So I had a network marketing business with a company
Mhm.
where I sold vitamins.
Okay.
And as a lead magnet for building that business from a business opportunity perspective, I was going around the country teaching these workshops called Women and Wealth, because I wanted to, as a lead generation generator, I wanted to get women thinking about the possibilities of financial freedom in their lives. And then I knew a certain percentage of them, right? Funnels, but it was just an in person thing. It was essentially like olden days webinar, but I did it like in church basements. Um, and I wanted people to think about, creating wealth for themselves and possibilities there. And I knew a certain percentage which would join my business. Over time, though, what happened is that workshop became way more than a lead generation generator.
Mm.
And I ended up getting invited through a series of synchronicities. I ended up getting invited to do that talk without the sales pitch at Urban Zen, at Donna Karen's Urban Zen studio, as part of the Reveal conference, which my
Mm.
friend Megan Watterson was putting on. She's the author of Mary Magdalene Revealed. And I did an amazing job. It was like the best talk of my life. And a woman was sitting in the audience who was the lead editor at Hay House. And so she offered me a book deal. So that's how that happened. I mean, that's
Okay.
like the very abbreviated story. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, I've got all these ideas for books, and I pitched them like 5 different ideas. And then Reed Tracy, the CEO, was like, great, do the money one. So I was like, okay, I'll do the money
Yeah.
one. And then,
Do
and then
people
here we
assume?
were.
So that it sounds like it was very like organic.
It was totally organic.
Yeah.
I thought I was gonna like go into real estate development, or maybe be an art gallery owner. I mean, I didn't
Do
know what I was doing.
do people like when they find out about you? Do they assume that you got into this because of your mom, like,
I
or your
think
mom has?
so. I mean, well, I think if they know who she is, yes,
Hmm.
yes, and absolutely, that's true. Like
Hmm.
she was doing her thing, and I was just from an early age. I really enjoyed. Like I
Hmm.
would sit in her lectures, and I liked it. Like I liked the information. I was personally deeply inspired by the research. I was like, I liked it. And I would travel to
Yeah.
go see her speak. And so I absolutely, had connections in the industry. And then what happened was, though, this is another part of the story. What happened was my mom and I had partnered in that direct selling business. So
Okay.
I was like building. So I built my own one. And then eventually she was like, saw how much money I was making. And she was like, she was like, well, I should do that. And I was like, great.
Mhm.
Okay. So we'll do this together. So we had partnered. I was running her team. And over time, I started to feel really trapped because of a variety of issues, and a lot of that I tell the whole story in my first book, Money: A Love Story. So it's not private; it's just this more details. And so I started writing a blog because I just wanted to feel free. And I wanted to talk about whatever I wanted to talk about. And I didn't want it to have to be like about building this thing with my famous mother and whatever. So I just
Mhm.
was like, I'm going to write this blog. I didn't even know that that could be a business. Like I had
Mhm.
no idea. I didn't know about online marketing. I didn't know about any of it. So I start this blog. It kind of starts taking, like growing. And then I ended up meeting around that same time Danielle Laporte and Marie Forleo. And they were starting off with Danielle was doing the first launch of the Fire Starter sessions, which
Mhm.
was at the time an online program. And then Marie, I'll never forget, I'll never forget. We were driving to the beach and Marie was like, hey, so I had this idea to like teach an online marketing course for women. What do you think? And I was like, I think it sounds like a great idea. I'd sign up. So that was, of course, B School that she launched in 2010 for
Yeah.
the first time, and kind of like shaped a huge industry, or
Yeah.
like really made some waves. So anyway, I realized that these ladies who I admired were doing cool stuff. So I just started recommending their things. And I'll never forget, during the first B School launch, I made $9,000. And I was like, at that time in my life, it might as well have been 9 million. I mean, I was making $34,000 a year, and I was like, $9,000 from like writing about something I love and sending an email. I mean, my mind was blown. So that's also how I got into this, was through
Mhm.
affiliate marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
writing what I felt like
It's
writing about.
so it's so funny because I think it's kind of maybe it's like that generational joy thing you were talking about. Like maybe you adopted a lot of the learning from
Yeah,
your mom, but at the end of the day, because I know a lot of people that are like public figures that their parents are also public figures, and I'm surprised to find out actually their parents' connections had almost nothing to do with their kids' success. It
yeah,
was almost like they would have done it on their own,
yeah.
and it's so funny like how because also like a lot of these public figures, when they have multiple kids, not all of their kids become successful either.
It's true.
So
You just like, I don't know what that is. It's kind of a big mystery.
yeah.
But it certainly helped. And I'll tell you, the way it helped specifically was what I talked about before, was the more like unconscious permission. Like I just
Mm-hmm.
didn't have I
Yeah.
work with a lot of people, and I don't know if this comes up in your communities as well. I work with a lot of people who are not sure that their message is valuable. Like they're not sure, they're like that imposter syndrome thing.
Yeah.
I just didn't have that.
Yeah.
I just was like, people listen to women in my family. So that is the thing I'm the most grateful for. It wasn't specific connections, but it was like this imprint of my voice matters. I can be a leader who talks about stuff I'm
Is that
interested in,
one of the
and people will listen.
is that something that you help people with? That
Yeah, because that's actually neural patterning. I mean,
okay.
and this goes deep. This goes deep into ancestral trauma and collective trauma. Especially, most of my community is women, and so when working with women specifically, and I learned a lot of this from Dr. Valerie Rain in her book Patriarchy Stress Disorder. We have to really understand that for thousands and thousands of years, it was historically unsafe to be a powerful public woman. Like the witch trials, the Inquisition, I mean, any woman who was screwing with the order was absolutely taken out. So
Mhm.
from an ancestral trauma perspective, women's bodies have like a deep remembering
Yeah.
of like, don't stand out, you'll
Yeah.
die. So
Like
if
they have that like be a good girl like
be a good
implant.
girl,
Yeah.
don't say anything
Yeah.
that's going to ruffle
Yeah.
anybody's feathers, don't do anything that's going to make anybody jealous of you. Like Keep it down, tamp it down. Otherwise, you will literally be killed. And so what I really love to like let people know is like that's just a survival neural pattern. And when you know how to work with your nervous system, you can actually just do the somatic practices over time in small doable ways to update your nervous system that it's 2024. And actually, if you do an Instagram story or like launch your podcast or pitch yourself on a public stage, no one's going to kill you.
Yeah.
Like, actually, that's
How
safe
do you
to do.
what are some of those practices that you
Yeah.
have them? Like, so for
So,
people that are listening, let's say that are women that do feel this way,
yeah.
what should they
And
do?
by the way, this works for any resistance you have around anything that you want. So it
Okay.
doesn't even have to be
Okay.
about
Okay.
being a publisher. Like it works
Okay.
for it's literally anything.
Like asking for a
You want a
raise or
different
yeah.
kind of love relationship in your life. You want to start working out and you can't get yourself to do it. You want to write a book, you want to ask for a raise, any of it. So what we know is that the nervous system has a thermostat, and this thermostat gets set according to our childhood experiences, according to our collective experiences, and according to our ancestral wiring. So that thermostat is like, okay, this is what we get to have and be safe. This is the stimulus we have received and the experience we've gathered of like, this is what it means to be alive.
Mhm.
And our nervous system, anything new, anything that's a stimulus that's new, will automatically register as a threat, especially if we are not doing a good job of metabolizing our daily stress. So, first things first, we need to be metabolizing our daily stress. If you have not read the book Burnout by Amelia and Emily Nagoski, it is phenomenal. It talks about completing the emotional stress cycle and that burnout is not necessarily caused by doing too much. It is caused by not feeling our feelings and by not completing the emotional stress cycle. It's caused by living in a culture that has conditioned us to suppress and repress our emotions and to think that not feeling means being stronger, which is why I have a really big issue with the whole like what's the whole freaking movement about the not feeling the it starts with an S. Oh my God, why can I not think of this word? Okay, it'll come to me. I'll
Is
come back to
okay, yeah.
it. Okay. That's gonna drive me crazy. Wait, hold on. Hold on. The Stoics.
Oh,
Stoic.
okay.
Yes, like this idea. Now, listen, of course, there's some value in everything, but like this idea of stoicism that we don't have emotional ups and downs leads to burnout for sure and physical illness because emotions not expressed get repressed and turn into illness.
Mhm.
Okay. So, how do we do that? How do we close the emotional stress loop every day? Movement, breath, tears, strong, safe social connection, creativity. Those are basically it. So, creative
Mm.
expression, movement, breath, sound, tears, laughter. And then I like to add orgasms to the list because I think that they help everything. So, all of those things will close the emotional stress loop. So, they essentially, at the end of the day, you have a lower bucket of stress. Like you've like dumped your stress bucket every day
Mhm.
as much as you can. And then when you have something happen where it's like, perfect example, real life story, Louise Hay offered me a book deal. I'm in New York. I'm at the Union Square Hotel, or not the Union Square Hotel, the W in Union Square. I'll never forget it. She's like the grande dame of personal development. She's like, we'd like to publish your book. I go across the street to this cafe and I sit in a booth by myself and I burst into hysterical tears. I had like this shame attack, this guilt attack. I was like, I don't deserve this. There are other people who want this more. I'm taking someone else's chance. It came to me too easily. My mother is a famous person. I shouldn't have this. It's, just like undeserving, undeserving, undeserving. What I know now that I didn't know at the time is that I was experiencing something that my nervous system was experiencing as a threat because it was something new that was beyond the realm of expansion that I had experienced before. So my body was like, don't do
Mm-hmm.
that. You're going to die. And when we have that happen, when we get offered an incredible opportunity, when we go out on a date with someone and they treat us better than anyone ever else has, and then we just like get suddenly disgusted by
Mm-hmm.
them, right? Or like whatever happens,
Yeah.
our mind will tell us all sorts of reasons to back away from the expansion, because rewiring our neural patterning is expensive. And our survival patterning, our animal nature, does not want to spend the energy to do it. It actually literally just uses a lot of calories to
Mm.
undo neural patterns and redo new ones in the myelination. It's like, it takes a lot. So you have to have the capacity. And if you are not dumping the stress bucket every day, you will not have the capacity to feel new things, think in new ways, ingrain new beliefs, learn new skills, and behave in new ways. You just won't do it. And
Yeah.
so we'll keep having this Groundhog Day experience of like, why is it that I want all these things? I want to make more money in my business. I want to have more impact. I want to do all these things. And yet I can't get past this threshold. It is
Mm-hmm.
because your nervous system is trying to keep you at the threshold. And no one told us that the way to actually change our reality is to work with our bodies, not only our mindset. We've been told, oh, it's just your thoughts. You have to think a
Yeah.
thought that feels better. It's just your mindset. Our mindset is determined by the patterns in our bodies, like in our somatic experience. And if we don't bring our bodies to the party, we're not going to get the
Yeah.
results and the transformation that we crave.
That's actually, I, you know, because I heard you talk about this, that like how like most of the information, like 80% of it is coming from our body to our brain, not the other way
Yeah.
around. And it's, but we like most of us nowadays in the modern world, we live in our head. Most like we're trying to
Yeah.
use our brain to fix problems and things like that. And so, what are some practicals to kind of go through that
Mhm.
stress, to dump out that stress on a daily basis? What are some
Right. The
practical things
daily
we can do?
basis, I
Yeah,
said all those things, but then on a more like acute basis,
yeah.
right? So, like the other day, I was having a conversation that was quite stressful, and it was a conversation on Zoom. And I could feel my body. So, this requires some attention, and this takes practice to actually begin to pay attention to the sensations in your body, because the sensations in your body are the first sign that you're up against an edge of expansion. Your body will be like, don't do
Mm,
that.
mm,
Like,
mm, mm,
that's beyond where we've gone before. Don't go outside the village. So that's what's happening. So I'm like, in this conversation, it's stressful. I know I'm going to need to bring myself to a new level of clarity and honesty in this communication, a new level that I've not done before. Feels like an edge, feels like a risk. And so what I did is, underneath the screen, I'll show it to you above the screen now and I'll describe for people who are
mm,
only listening, but I did a practice called havening. And havening is you can use this in acute scenarios of stress, and it will signal to your nervous system, we're safe here. There's no imminent threat. A tiger is not going to kill us. Everything is okay. This is just a conversation. And so what I did is I did havening. And havening is just gently, slowly rubbing one hand over the other hand. And you can do your forearms as well. And I did it underneath the camera, so you couldn't see that I was doing this, but it slows you down and brings you to the present moment. And you just want to, as you're rubbing one hand over your arm and over the other hand, you want to just tune into, what does it feel like to be the hand touching my other hand and arm? And then what does it feel like to be the arm and the hand being touched? And you can hear in my voice, I can't talk as
mm, mm.
fast. Like, I just shifted my nervous system to, I downregulated.
Yeah.
It's profound. You are opening up, and then this whole physiological cocktail takes place of neurotransmitters and hormones and oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine. And it makes you more available to collaboration, to connection, to creative thinking, to problem solving, to open up, to be a conduit for the divine wisdom that wants to come through. And so you can combine the daily practices that I said of dumping the stress bucket as much as possible. And then those acute practices, I mean, there's a million of them, but that's just one, those acute practices of signaling safety in the moment that you acknowledge that you're in resistance.
Yeah, I love that. It's like as you're saying that, I'm like doing it here, and it almost like it is like bringing everything from your head to your body, and
Isn't it great?
you're being more present with in your body.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's um yeah, like because I can totally, because what happens to me usually is like, for example, like if I book a podcast, like this podcast interview with you, or if I get some big opportunity, I'm like, immediately, even though like 2 seconds ago I didn't even have this opportunity, as soon as I get that opportunity, I start feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fuck it up, or like, do you know what I mean? Like, I start to, so I can kind of totally see
Yeah.
what you mean by that.
Well, and like a mindset coach will be
Yeah.
like, oh, dude, you just have to tell yourself a different story. Like, choose, psych yourself up. Da, da, da. And I'm just, I'm exaggerating, but like,
Yeah.
and they'll be like, oh, the change happens at the level of the mind. It doesn't.
Yeah.
All you need to do is tell your body it's safe. And then all of a sudden your thoughts will just shut up
Yeah.
and be more supportive.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's also like why I love yoga, because like I feel like
Yes.
yoga really like brings
Yes.
everything to your body, and
It does. And the things that seemed really hard or problems that we couldn't solve, when we get in our bodies, when we're taking a walk, when we're taking a shower, sitting in the sauna, going to yoga, suddenly it's like, oh, actually that solution
yeah,
was really obvious.
yeah, it puts things into perspective almost.
Yes. Yeah.
Before you were talking about the burnout, this is something also another thing that I heard you talk about a while back, um, and it has to do with time, like, because it's one of the things that the biggest things I hear from people are like, oh, I don't understand, I don't have time to make content, or I don't have time to do this, or um and it's kind of hard for me, because like when like, for me, I don't have kids, but if like it's like a single mom who has a full-time job, who has two kids, like I can kind of understand, like,
You're like, yeah, that's a lot.
yeah. So
Yeah.
what would you say to people like that,
Mhm.
who are, first of all, I think there's two types of people that are not really that busy, but they're always busy, and they're always, and then there are people that are actually busy, they don't have time,
Yeah.
and it's a legitimate
You know, listen, when I didn't have kids and I was in my 20s and the only thing I was doing was running my business, I thought I was so busy. I thought I was so busy. I literally have no idea what I used to do with my time. And now I have two kids, 6 and 8. I run a company, I have employees, yeah, for periods of time. I've had a chronically ill husband. He's also my business partner. So we've had he's doing great right now, by the way. But like, there have been some very real time constraints. And yet I get way more done and have way more free time than I used to.
Mhm.
So what is the difference? Well, the good news is everything I talked about still applies. Our nervous systems have an amount of rest and spaciousness that feels safe. And if we start to go down the path of changing the way we manage our time and energy so that we're actually more efficient, more effective, get better results with less time, what comes up for many people is that having more spaciousness and not running around all day and not being constantly busy actually feels like we're going to die. Like it feels like a threat. And there's deep ancestral trauma in there. And there can be deep collective trauma. And when we think about all the different things that perhaps our ancestors experienced around work and achievement and our value being tied to work and what we delivered and who and what and oppressive systems. I mean, it's really can be quite intense in there. So if you're having trouble and saying like, I don't have time and there's not any availability to shift the reality, the truth is we all can create more time by changing what we're focused on and getting super clear on what moves the needle, which is always a very small percentage of things,
Mm.
and then getting rid of the rest or
Yeah.
outsourcing it or automating it or
Yeah.
systematizing it.
Yeah.
However, we have to get really clear that most people do not have the capacity to even be able to identify what their 20% is that gets them 80% of the results because they're so addicted to being busy and running on adrenaline, and their bodies do not feel safe to even take the action step to create better results in less time. And so we come back to the same thing I already talked about, which is nervous system health.
Mm.
The care and feeding of a healthy nervous system is dumping your stress and threat bucket every day. And if you tell me you don't have time for that stuff, I'm going to tell you, you are the one who needs it more than anyone else, because these practices don't have to take a long time. And I love to think about, like, as a mom, I think about how can I incorporate practices that are healing for me while I'm doing other stuff. So like to get my movement in while I'm pushing my daughter on the swing, I do squats in between pushes. Like I do shit like that. I am the crazy mom on the playground. Like I'm in an airplane. I'm in an airport, like on the floor doing a Pilates mat workout. I just get it in because I do stretches, you know, by the bathroom in the airplane, because our bodies are everything, and our bodies are the source of our best ideas, of our mental clarity, and our bodies are the source of time. If we can get our bodies in a state of relaxation, we create more time.
Yeah. You know, it's so funny, like as you were saying that, because I was that person, like of like 7 or 8 years ago, like that are always saying, oh, yeah, I can't do that. Like I don't have a week to do this, or like I don't have a day to do that. Like, and the funny thing is, I had to go to a yoga retreat because it was for my client.
Okay.
So it was like it was for work.
Love that.
But this yoga retreat they didn't have internet. They had not. It was like in the middle of nowhere, and I was fully disconnected. And I was like, the whole time I was thinking, when I get back, it's gonna be a shit show. Like everything is gonna be broken, and that was a time when I was glorifying like hard work, struggle, right? Like I have to meet with my team every day, and I have to go over check all the work. And what ended up happening is, first of all, because it was a yoga retreat, I feel like I wasn't as stressed as I normally would
Yeah.
have been. And when I came back, like my entire team stepped up,
They just
and they
figured it
were,
out, right?
yeah, like it's in the absence of me doing those things. It's almost like I was the one who was holding them back
Yeah.
from doing
It
things.
happens all the time. Like, because our egos are so embedded in achievement and being important. We've connected our value with how much we're needed
Mm-hmm.
and how much we get done and how many hours we work. And actually, when we can get ourselves plugged in to a different source of well-being, the same one that I talked about with my coffee and the bougainvillea in the morning, of like, can I get filled up by something that is between me and God, or whatever,
Mm-mm-mm-mm.
you know, me and nature, me and the earth, whatever your thing is, because then we come back to the truth, which is like, none of it matters. We're all
Yeah,
just
yeah,
gonna die.
yeah,
You know? And
yeah.
so I love that you had that experience, that they could rise to the occasion. And sometimes it takes something dramatic like that. Like I really made a huge shift during one of my maternity leaves where I had, you know, a really rough time and Mike was sick and it was a whole thing. and I just had to step away, and the team just stepped up, and it was
Yeah.
beautiful. Then you have evidence. You have lived evidence that actually what you thought was wrong,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Everything
now you
changed
can
from
never go
there.
back.
Yeah. So what would you say? I guess there's really nothing you can, because that, like, I don't know if I would have voluntarily made that decision to do that.
Oh,
Like,
I
you know what I
know.
mean?
Unfortunately, for so many people, it takes a crisis. It takes a health
Yeah.
crisis. It takes a personal crisis. It takes some kind of real, like, shit hitting the fan moment to
Mhm.
realize that the way we're working is not working. I wish that weren't true. But in my experience, that's just true. Like, most of us will just change when it hurts enough.
Mhm.
And then,
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't even say that because I'm probably just affirming it. In my experience, like, I haven't made the biggest changes until I've gotten really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the same for me. Like, most of the, like, I always say, there's nothing more humbling than running a business, because, like, I really feel like I've had to hit rock bottom multiple times, and every time I did, I learned some new lesson. Like, like, these are things that I didn't even know that I was struggling with. Like, I used to always say I don't care about money, and even that was trauma. Like, like, now we're saying that, it's not the money, it's not the money, it's the, it's the mindset. It's kind of like the having that plentiful thing. But for me, even though I was saying I don't care about money, it wasn't like really deep down. It wasn't true.
Right,
Does
because
that
you
make?
wouldn't be running a business if you didn't care about money. I
Yeah,
mean, we're in business to make money. Otherwise, like, it would just be a hobby,
exactly. Yeah,
right?
and
Yeah.
also, even that thing. Like, I used to always say, oh, I love working. And but even that wasn't really true either.
Really?
Like, yeah, it was, because, like, I was a workaholic,
Yeah.
and people always, like, kind of give me, like, son, like, you need to take a break, you need to go on vacation, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, I just love working, and it's like, but that wasn't entirely true either. I think what I was addicted to, what you were saying, is like that I was glorifying struggle and suffering.
Well,
You-
yes. And I think what's important, because there will be folks listening where this will really resonate. I had this experience as well where I realized, like, so when Mike was really sick this second time, we had this session with our therapist, and he said, okay, like, I was caught in a thing of, um I have to work really hard, and I'm holding the bag financially, and I have all this pressure. And, like, even though Mike was sick and he never chose to do this, I was, like, in this resentment pattern of, like, you get to just drop out of life. I don't get to drop out of life. I'm the face of the brand. Like, it was not my best self at all, but that's where I was. And so we're in this therapy session, and David, our therapist, was like, okay, Kate, close your eyes and imagine that Mike has just come home and he's like, hey, I just made $10 million. And so you don't need to do anything anymore. Like, we're good for a while. And David said, okay, now, like, how does it feel inside your body? And I was shocked by my response, because my response, what I felt was, like, sort of flatlined, like dead inside, depressed. And I
Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm.
was like, oh shit. I
Yeah.
am completely addicted to stress and pressure. And even if there's now, in that time in my life, there were a lot of external reasons to feel stressed and pressured. But I was like, if I keep waiting for everything outside myself to line up perfectly to finally give myself permission to relax, I will literally be waiting the rest of my life. And it
Mm.
was realizing that I was using stress and pressure as my fuel. Like, I didn't even feel alive without it. And
Yeah.
so that was a series of, that was like many, many months of doing some really deep nervous system repatterning, because my neural patterns were stress and pressure means being alive, because that's the environment I grew up
Mm.
in. That's how it felt. So that was just like, being a human means feeling this constant, like, I gotta
Yeah.
sprint, I gotta sprint. And now over time, I've been able to be like, oh no, I can actually just feel really safe and deeply fulfilled, like, with my cheek against my 6-year-old's cheek. Like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I
wild.
love that. Yeah, like as you were telling that story just right now with your, like imagine your husband came home with this thing that reminded me of like I had one of our project managers said, "Oh, I can just handle all of this, and you can do that."
Yeah.
And there was something about it is like if I take care of all of this and you just do that, would you be happy with that? Because like I was doing that, I was like, oh my gosh, like I got to do everything around here, this type of
Yeah.
thing. and and when he said that, I was like, that kind of triggered me. I'm like, I don't want that. Like I love the feeling of being needed. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to be obsolete, right? I don't want to be not
Well, and
needed
then
in
we're
this
back
company.
kind of to status and significance
Yeah, yeah,
and like animal nature of, okay, but if I'm not significant anymore, then I will be cast out of the herd and I will die.
yeah.
Yeah.
I also like. I also heard you say something about like how on social media you guys were spending all this time on the design and things like that, and at the end of the day, it turned out like those one, like you were investing all of this time into the things that wasn't really like, you know, the 80% bringing value. And I've had similar experiences where I wasted so much time on things that I thought I needed to do, but it turned out that it wasn't. Yeah. So I just
Yeah.
want to kind of, um, go ahead.
Oh, no. I mean, it's when we are, I'll just kind of point to when we are unconsciously addicted to being busy all the time, we will waste our time on stuff that doesn't matter because unconsciously the goal is to be busy, not to get results. But
Mhm.
when we change the goal to what gets results, all this time opens up because it
Yeah.
turns out not that much gets results. You
Yeah.
just focus on that and then you have all this extra time.
Can you talk a little bit about your workshop, Plenty of Time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, this workshop is really highlighting the mainstream productivity hacks that get us in trouble and keep us overwhelmed, addicted to busyness, and distracted, which are the main issues that our community has. Like, it's like, I have so much to do, not enough time to do it in. I'm overwhelmed by all the things. I don't know where to start. I'm so distracted by screens, my kids, da da da. I'm not focused enough to move the needle. And so there are things that the common practices of productivity, the sort of like high achievement, 10x your
Mm.
results, like those things are getting us in trouble, many of them. And so the workshop or the workshop is going to unpack the things that the mainstream is telling us we need to do to be productive and replace them with body-based energy management strategies that make it so that you have plenty of time to
I
do
love that.
everything that matters.
I love that. I'm gonna put the link to your workshop in the show notes.
Thank you.
I highly recommend everyone to go check out Kate's content, her blog, her programs, her podcasts. I'll put all the links in the bottom. I love what you just said because like those productivity hacks that I see on YouTube, like the like the perfect morning routine or the perfect like
Yeah.
daily productivity hack or like
Don't
all
even
these
get me started on that. I'm like, the perfect
things.
morning routine is my kids like rejecting 3 different breakfasts that I give them and like not putting on their socks.
Yeah, because like when I hear that, it gives me like it almost gives me anxiety attack because I
Yes,
feel like I'm not being productive enough. I feel, you know what I
totally.
mean?
And also, I will just say, like, as a mom, as someone who has had a partner with a chronic illness, I don't want to learn about time management and productivity from people. I mean, no offense, but like, I don't
Hmm.
want to learn about time management and productivity from people who are like single and
Yeah.
like hanging out and like not really having barriers on their
Uh-huh.
time. It just doesn't, it for me it doesn't, it's not helpful. So I only say that for anyone listening who is feeling like, I got these kids, I have like a special needs dog, I have aging parents, I have, whatever
Yeah.
might be going on, just to know like
Uh,
I get it. and what I teach works when your time doesn't totally feel like it's your own.
Yeah, I love it. I almost feel like it's like a completely different way to approach productivity and
Yeah.
time and money, and it's like it's definitely something that I don't hear really like anyone talking about. So, oh, by the way, I wanted to there was one question I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you. So you also work with your husband now,
Yes, we're
or
business partners. Yeah.
okay? So what is that? Because like I work with my wife,
Oh,
and
really?
a lot of my clients do work with their like
Yeah.
Gabby works with
I
her
know Gabby and
husband,
Zach.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I what is that like, and what are some, because people are always asking me like how can you work with
What are your
your
tips?
yeah
Um, yeah, I mean, Mike and I are destined to work together. We've been basically working together since the day we started, we were together. It just, he and I have completely complementary and opposite skill sets. Like what I'm good at, he's terrible at, and what I'm terrible at, he's just really good at. That works well for us because we have tremendous role clarity, which is what I would really recommend, is like get
yeah.
super clear on who's doing what, have it written, have agreements, so that you're not like getting up in each other's business. So that's number one. And I really, you know what? It works really well for us when we have a really strong energy person who's essentially our director of operations, so that like Mike and I aren't in this dual, like, you
Like
said
a
you were going to do
moderator.
this, but you didn't. Da, 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 da. Exactly. She's kind. It's like a good, strong moderator. Our director of operations has just done wonders for our marriage.
That's so like that's awesome. Like I wanted to ask you like about, because so many, first of all, me and my wife Gigi, we have that kind of relationship where we have a clear line of what she's good at and what I'm
Yes.
good at, and we
Right.
don't cross that line at all. In the beginning we did struggle because we also work together in my agency too, and one of the thing is like, maybe it might be related to this time thing. Like in the beginning I didn't actually give her enough authority, because people always come to me and because like the thing is I'm good at like the creative part, creating, doing on the client projects, and she's really great at the operation side, where like collecting money and all of those kind of type of things,
Yeah.
like, and making sure like our invoices are paid and all of those things, and like making sure that we negotiate, and like making sure we make money. That's kind of her
Yes.
job, right?
Yes.
And I'm terrible at that. Like when I was running the business by myself, like we were losing money constantly. Like money was leaking everywhere, and
Wow.
I was spending too much and all of those things. But the thing is, I kept telling her like, no, we can't. Like, for example, she wanted to raise our rates, raise prices, and I'm like, no, we can't raise rates, because then all of our clients gonna complain, and we're gonna lose.
Uh-huh.
And but it got to a point where, because I was so busy, I kind of didn't even pay attention to it.
So
And then
she
six
just did
months
it.
later, yeah, 6 months later, I look back and she raised our rates.
I
She
love
had
it.
all of these like process in place. I'm like, what? Like I kind of yelled at her. I was like, why did you do that? That's gonna blah blah blah. And then, but then I also found that we had all this like money that we made in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, the clients are happy. We raised it a few months ago, and it was just, that's when I realized like a lot of people come to me and say, son, how can I find somebody like Gigi? How can I find somebody like that? And I always tell them, it's not that you go have to find them. It's that there's probably somebody like that around you already. You're
Yes,
just not
you have
listening to
to
them.
let them.
Yeah.
Well, and it's similar to what you said about going on the yoga retreat. Like you get yourself out of the way and you let people shine. And I think that one of the things that we so often do, I see people do it with their kids all the time. We do it with our spouses, we do it with our clients, is our energy can be deeply disempowering and enabling. So we will relate to people at a lower level of power than they're capable of. But actually, when we relate to people and our power speaks to their power, they just rise to the occasion. Now, it sounds like Gigi didn't need to rise to the occasion. She was there. But like,
She did it. Yeah.
we just have to move out of the way, essentially,
Yeah.
and like go back to, where is my identity and my sense of safety and well-being overcoupled with how needed I am and how busy I am and how wealthy I am. Quite frankly, that's like another conversation for another day. But when we can do that, we can start to realize like, oh, there's actually a lot of space here for other people to step up. And we can see that, yeah, we were the one blocking them all along.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that really resonates with me because I have this ego and I'm always the one that's getting in the way of my own
Yeah.
way. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all your wisdom. I'm gonna put all your links in the bottom. Everyone,
Thank
definitely go
you.
check out
Thank you.
everything
This
from
was so
Kate.
fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kate. Hope to see you again. Hope we get to chat again. And
Yes, for sure.
I'll see you, everyone. Cheers.